my son David will probably be coming in for that. David is very, as you know from last week, he's very knowledgeable about film. That's his career. And he spent time at a film academy and studying film. So he's really a walking, talking film encyclopedia. Tomorrow, in the Schenectady paper, I will have a op-ed piece on the Concordia Assisted Living development on Sandy Drive in Amsterdam. It will be a little bit more expanded version of what I said on the radio last week. We will not be taking calls again today. I'm still learning how to take calls, but I've also been concerned about some of the calls that I've heard on other shows. Somebody called in the other day and referred to Amsterdam as Amsterico. If I start taking calls, if you do that, you will be banned from calling again. That's a slur against the city, and it's a slur against a large portion of our community. Also, somebody called in, a former alderman, former supervisor, and said that the money that would be loaned for the Concordia Assisted Living development was corporate welfare, and that is not true. Corporate welfare is money that's given and not expected to be given back. The money that will be loaned to the Concordia Assisted Living program, and of course that money will be paid back with interest. At the end of the show today, I will be talking about a situation in the town of Palatine where the Palatine town supervisor, she does not say the Pledge of Allegiance. It's against her religion, and she's been taken to task for that, and we will talk about that. I also wanted to read to you, believe it or not, I got my first piece of fan mail. Actually, it was an email. I will not give the person's name because I don't think she would appreciate it. But she said, Dan, many thanks for having a good reason to tune in to WCSS. It was refreshing to listen to an intelligent, informative conversation. And that's from somebody that has not listened to the station in years. Finally, today is the birthday of Bert DeRose. I got that information from Mike Cinquanti's Amsterdam birthday blog. If you're not familiar with that, hopefully we'll have Mike on the show someday to talk about his blog on the internet, where he focuses each day on somebody in Amsterdam. Maybe not somebody really famous, but today is Bert DeRose's birthday. It's also, for those of you who are readers, it is Laura Ingalls Wilder's birthday. Laura Ingalls Wilder, the author of all the Little House books. Now, our guest today is Jerry Scrocky. Many of you probably know Jerry.
Jerry, there's a spare port, but I can't give you Wi-Fi.
Jerry is a retired corrections officer, a photographer, and a blogger, and for our purposes today, a neighbor of Amsterdam's Buddhist community. Amsterdam and Montgomery County's Buddhist community is the subject of the first part of our show. And for those of you who are not familiar, you know that this past week the Buddhists sent an invitation out to a lot of people, including myself, to come to a celebration that they were having at one of their temples. And Mayor Thane got a copy of it, and she responded to them in a, well, rather rude way, as they characterize it. And I think it was somewhat. That she would not be coming, that they had cost Amsterdam a lot of money, that they were disingenuous, and that she did not want to hear from them again. And following up with that, of course, there's been controversy over the Buddhists for a long time, but following up with that was a front page article in the Schenectady paper and an article in the Amsterdam Recorder, and Jerry was interviewed for the one article. And that's one of the reasons why I wanted him on today. You need to know this, though, that Jerry and I have often been at odds. I've supported the mayor, he hasn't. But that does not keep me from having people on this show. Just because you disagree with me doesn't mean I won't invite you to come on the show. So Jerry, welcome. Thank you for coming on the show today.
Thank you, Dan. And the reason I wanted to come on the show was to give an image that's not portrayed in the press about the Buddhists. I mean, they're very genuine people. They're here to promote peace and harmony, and they've not been portrayed like that in the papers.
And on top of that, there's been incredible rumors I've heard on the radio and elsewhere that just aren't true. And what I want to deal in today is facts. That's what I deal with on the show. I don't deal with people's motivations. I don't deal with guessing what people are thinking in their mind, but I want to deal with facts. Now, somebody called in one of the shows and said that the Buddhists had collected rents on all those buildings that then went back to the city. And of course that wasn't true. And thankfully the talk show host that day told them that wasn't true. Those buildings it wasn't possible to rent them out. Somebody else called in and said the Buddhists were getting their money from some communist Chinese. Another, rumor. So, in Amsterdam, there's always a lot of rumors, and if I start taking calls, which I hope to do someday, if you say something like that, I'm going to ask you to prove it. You have to be able to prove what you say. If you say the Buddhists get their money from the Chinese mafia, or they get it from the communists, or this or that, don't say stuff like that unless you have proof to back it up. And proof can't just be Joe Blow told me. It has to be some documents. Well, with that in mind, Jerry, how long have you known the Buddhists, and what has been your relationship with them?
Well, Dan, I met them when they first bought the former St. Michael's Parish on Grove Street, which they've now converted to the Goddess of Mercy Temple. When the Catholic Church moved out, they hired a company to come in and strip the church clean. Stained glass windows, pews, everything. It was just a shell. I watched these people come in and systematically work together as a group. It reminded me like of a bunch of ants working towards a similar goal to restore the building and turn it into a temple. I came home one day and saw them posed out in front of the building after they had finished it for a picture. So I ran upstairs and grabbed my camera and came out and started taking pictures too. They came over, introduced themselves, told me who they were, why they were here, and invited me to their next event. And that's how my relationship started with them. When I saw how a lot of the local people, probably out of ignorance, started treating them unfairly, that's when I came to their aid and tried to promote information that would help educate the public about who they were, about Chinese culture, about Buddhism, about why they're here, and to dispel any of those rumors and try to dissuade any of the bigoted attitudes that are out there.
Well, yeah, and I've had so many people say, there's no prejudice against them. Of course, many people I've heard say, I'm not prejudiced against the Buddhists, but, and then there always follows, something after the but that kind of works against what they said in the first part of their statement. But let's talk about discrimination, because that even goes beyond prejudice. Again, I've heard over and over that there's been no discrimination against the Buddhist community in Montgomery County. Yet I have here in my hands documents that I printed off the internet that show that the parking lots of the Buddhist temples in Amsterdam have been put back on the tax rolls. In other words, the nonprofit status of those parking lots that belong to those temples has been revoked. Then I checked on the tax rolls to see if that happened to any other churches in Amsterdam. I looked at the parking, in fact, let me tell you which ones I looked at. I looked at Trinity Lutheran Church. Their parking lot has not had its tax exemption revoked. I looked at St. Mary's Church. They have a parking lot at 151 to 159 East Main and one at 146 East Main. Theirs was not revoked. I looked at Calvary Assemblies of God. Now both of these, St. Mary's and Calvary, are on East Main, which is where one of the Buddhist temples is. 209 to 211 East Main isn't even labeled as a parking lot. It's labeled as residential vacant land, belongs to Calvary Assembly of God, and is not taxed. So I sent an email to Mr. Calvin Klein, the city assessor, on Thursday morning, and I asked him, I said, first of all, I asked, could you tell me if the Buddhists are the only ones that you've revoked the tax exempt status of their parking lots? No response. So that's when I did my own research. I emailed him again Friday morning and I said, you didn't get back to me. I did my own research. I found that just only the Buddhists have had the tax exemption revoked for their parking lots. What is your rationale for this? I CC'd a copy to Mayor Thane. 3 o'clock Friday afternoon. This was 8:45 in the morning. At 3 in the afternoon, I received an email from Mr. Klein saying, please call me and I will give you the rationale. I received the email, actually, it was sent out at 3 o'clock. I received it at 3:03. I didn't see it, though, actually, to 3:45. Called right away at 3:45. No answer. Left a message for him to get back to me. Didn't get back to me. I called him again an hour later. Nobody there. Left a message. So he never returned my call. I will not speculate on why that happened. Maybe he went home early, but I don't. There was only a 45-minute window between the email, less than 45, between the email and my calling the number that he gave me. So I'm left with no explanation for why the Buddhist parking lot exemptions have been revoked. Jerry, do you have any possible explanation? I mean, to me, on the face of it, it looks like discrimination. You've picked out two churches, one religion, and said your parking lots are not going to be tax exempt. Everybody else has been left alone. Their parking lots have been left alone.
Dan, I've been complaining a lot about the city using local laws and regulations as weapons against people to target different people that may disagree with the administration for one reason or another. And I think this is just another example. You saw the mayor's statement about the Buddhists and her disingenuous statement about their sale of their property to what she termed a phony corporation. And I believe this was done in retaliation for that. The Buddhists are ultimately going to win this because it's illegal what he did, even though the state gives assessors a lot of power.
Right.
He cannot discriminate, and it's against the New York State Constitution, it's against human rights laws, but now they have to jump through all these hoops.
Yeah, well, see, that was my next question. Do you consider this a violation of the Buddhist First Amendment rights? And it does appear to me. Now, I myself don't want to say anything about why this happened. I don't, as I said to you, and I said earlier in the show, I don't like to speculate about why things happen. I did hear that the Buddhists, according to Mr. Klein, possibly are not using the parking lots for what they were intended. What does that mean? I mean,
that's the only rationale the state gives him for revoking a tax.
Okay, so what have they been doing? Running a hot dog stand on one of them?
Exactly. Now, if that line of thinking were true, then he would have to take this tax exempt status from the church and the rectory building too,
right.
The temple, because that would be consistent with the statement. But to just take the tax exemption from the parking lot and not the other two buildings, that sends a different message.
And so they haven't taken it. They have not removed the tax exemption from either Buddhist temple or the rectories.
That's correct.
But the parking lots associated with the church, where people would park if they were going to the temple.
And people do.
And people do. Right.
And I have documentation as well as they do. I mean, I've attended these ceremonies and Buddhist ceremonies also, and Chinese culture ceremonies at both temples. And
right.
Both times parked in the parking lots, as did everyone else.
Right. And in this day and age, it's pretty hard for a church to exist without a parking lot. So what's happened over the years, some of these churches were built before the automobiles. So what happened is they bought houses next to them, tore those houses down, and made parking lot. Now those parking lots show up on the tax rolls as separate pieces of property. So they're actually separate from the church building, but you can't have worship. A church can't have worship without a place for people to park, whether it's a Buddhist temple or Presbyterian church. You've got to have those parking lots.
That's right, Dan. And if you check the tax status for the other religious organizations in this area, you'll see that their parking lots are also listed as separate entities.
They are. That's what I noticed. Well, I did my own research because when Mr. Klein did not get back to me, I said, well, I'm going to do my own research. And by the way, my interest in this is not to be against Mr. Klein or Mayor Thane, who I admire greatly. Everybody knows my admiration for Mayor Thane. She's a remarkable woman. But I'm very interested in First Amendment issues, freedom of speech and freedom of religion. That's what makes America different from all other countries in the world, freedom of speech and freedom of religion. In Europe, every country had a state church. You were required to pay tithes to that church whether you belonged to it or not. If you were an atheist, you had to pay it too. If in England, you had to pay tithe to the Church of England. If you were a Baptist, you not only had to pay tithe to the Church of England, you could not even go to Cambridge or Oxford University until the mid-1800s. They didn't allow you to enter unless you were a part of the Church of England. So that's the kind of thing we were trying to avoid in this country, and all churches were to be treated equal. So, before we go on, I just want to remind you that this is WCSS 1490 AM. This is Dan Weaver, your host. This is Valley Vox. So where are the Buddhists at right now? They've got this before the Assessment Review Board, this whole issue?
Yes, they did appear before the Assessment Review Board after contacting Mr. Klein and trying to reconcile the issue first with him. Upon not receiving any satisfaction with that, they had to go before the Assessment Review Board. Now, the board did give them another week to submit more paperwork, but they asked them questions that I feel were totally inappropriate for the situation. Like, what kind of documentation do you have that says you're Buddhist? And,
Yeah.
and it's totally inappropriate.
I agree. I mean, if you're going to do that, then you need to go to every church that has a parking lot and ask the same questions of them. And you know, I mean, first of all, it seems to me that it's up to the assessor to be proven that there's reasons for why this group shouldn't have tax exemption on their parking lot. They shouldn't have to prove that they're a religion. They bought the building. They've had services there. I don't know what else you need.
The other point is that they are certified as a not-for-profit
That's true.
501c3 religious organization.
Exactly.
They file annual updates with the state as they're required to.
Right.
And there's been no problem with that so far.
So there's really no more that's needed. Who is on the review board, do you know?
I had 3 names that I was given. The only one that sticks in my mind is former Mayor Mario Villa.
Okay.
The other people I'm not familiar with.
Okay. I meant to look myself and I didn't get a chance to. But hopefully Mr. Villa will be fair and honest in he seems to be that kind of man.
I have found him to be that in the past too, and the brief dealings that I had with him on the Common Council's update committee for the charter.
Right, okay. So hopefully the Assessment Review Board will toss this, because if they don't, what's likely to happen? I mean, it seems to me it's going to end up in court.
It is, and it's going to cost the city money, because this is almost a guaranteed win for the Buddhist organization, and they'll be putting in for court costs, lawyer fees.
Right. Yeah, I mean, it just seems to me a no-brainer that unless you revoke the tax exemption of every parking lot of every church or religious organization in Amsterdam, you're going to have a problem, because you're discriminating. And then you would have a problem even then, because the parking lots are an integral part of the church. You can't really have worship without the parking lot. So therefore, it should be tax exempt, because it's part of the whole religious purpose of the church.
I have 2 things that I want to state here, and the first is from the New York State Constitution, article on taxation. In section 1, it says, exemptions from taxation may be granted only by general laws. Exemptions may be altered or repealed, except those exempting real or personal property used exclusively for religious, educational, or charitable purposes as defined by law, and owned by any corporation or association organized or conducted exclusively for one or more such purposes and not operating for profit. So that would indicate that the local assessor doesn't have the power to do that.
Right. And so you got the state constitution, and then you got the federal constitution, both, which and so many of these, there's so much case law involving this already, and I'm not an attorney, but there's so much case law involving this already that it just seems to be a very bad move to be making on the part of the assessor. Are there any attorneys on the Assessment Review Board? Do you know?
No, there are not. But there are several opinions of counsel out there for the Department of Taxation from previous cases that make legal opinions about certain situations, and there certainly is about 7 or 8 of them that do cover this topic, and all in favor of not having these properties exemption removed.
Right. And of course, then there's just this basic issue that you're doing it to one religion only. It's just a very, very serious issue. Go ahead.
Can I
Sure.
just,
Yeah.
Another point I want to make is that a lot of local people feel that Buddhism is not a religion, that it's not a valid religion. They don't see this group as a religious organization. And to them I say, take out Buddhist and put in your religion, put in Catholic religion, and see if you feel the same way.
Yeah, that's a good point. Of course, I have all kinds of books in my store on religion, and any book on the world's major religions has a section on Buddhism. Now, this group may be a Buddhist sect, or possibly some people might consider a Buddhist cult. They're not mainline Buddhists, but nevertheless, there are numerous Christian sects and Christian cults in this area who have tax-exempt status. That's totally beside the point, really. It's just completely beside the point. Well, let's turn to another issue, because the Buddhists aren't just in Amsterdam. They're in Montgomery County. They're in Fulton County. They own land in Fulton County. What other properties do they own in Montgomery County?
In Montgomery County, they own, of course, the former Jesuit dormitory on the grounds of the Orisville Shrine. I think it's 174 Shrine Road is the address, and they've encountered a lot of problems there too with a certain Jesuit priest.
Now, what about? Don't they own some property in Fultonville too?
They own the former Masonic temple in Fultonville that was really falling apart and had been flooded with the local flood. And they did a lot to restore that building, and they restored it into a table tennis, a world-class table tennis playing area. And they had the Japanese national world champion there to oversee the construction. It was built. And I don't know what's happened with it since. I don't think it's been used. So they do start a lot of projects. They're very ambitious, but follow-through seems to be lacking with a lot of these projects.
Right. Yeah, they have gotten in over their head. They obviously got in over their head with the 40-some buildings they bought. But with the most important buildings they bought, which is the Jesuit dormitory in Orisville, the two churches in Amsterdam, former St. Casimir's and former St. Michael's, those buildings are being taken care of and maintained, and it would have been sad to have seen those buildings taken down. And if they had not purchased those, and by the way, they bought those buildings directly from the diocese, they did not buy them from the city. They spent good money on the purchase of those buildings and money fixing them up. So on the major buildings, they have kept to their promises of taking care of. But with these 40-some houses, they have, and of course they had these big plans to do other things, invest a lot of money, and that all fell through too. So I do understand the mayor's disappointment with them. I understand it. I don't understand, I think the response should have been worded different, but I do understand her disappointment. I understand other people's disappointment. Yet none of that changes the fact that here we have what appears to me to be a very definite case of discrimination. Now, the Buddhists did complain that people broke into their property and stole stuff, pipes and other things stripped out of there, and that was an act of discrimination, but that doesn't appear to be the case at all. That just appears to be vandals who were targeting easy targets. Do you agree with that?
I do agree with that, Dan, and I imagine it would be hard for someone of a different race to move to another country where they speak a totally different language and have something happen to you and not believe that it was because you're different. But yeah, it's something that's happened all over Amsterdam and the Capital District. It wasn't because of their religion or their race that they got broken into or had this stuff stolen out of these properties. And I did go around when they called me up, and we've got another break-in, can you document it for us? And I would photograph it for them. And so these things did happen.
And yes, and I can understand how that would bother them. If I went to China and bought a bunch of houses and they were all broken into and vandalized, I might think it was some Chinese gang and that was picking on me because I was an American. But there's another situation, and that's in Orisville, where the Orisville Shrine has put up all these signs that say no dogs allowed. Now, some of the Buddhists have also said that they feel that this is a slur on them. I want to tell a brief little story. I don't believe it is a slur on them, but I understand why, and I'll explain that in a minute too. I have friends who are walking a dog at the Orisville Shrine. They always walk their dogs up there. They just enjoyed the peace of it, tranquility and so on. And somebody came out and told them one day that you're not allowed to walk your dogs on the shrine property. They said okay, and they just kept on walking for a few more minutes, and they were going to go to their car. But apparently, because they didn't take their dog and leave, immediately, somebody else came out, and I won't mention who it was. I'm not, I don't want to cause any problems, and really lit into them and cussed them out and everything for several minutes. they call the diocese and complain, but Oriental Shrine is not under the diocese, it's under the Jesuit house in New York. So anyway, it was shortly after that that the No Dogs Allowed sign went up. I was driving through there and I couldn't believe it. There were so many of them. But if you understand Chinese culture, you'll understand that this whole issue of there was a sign up apparently when the British or Americans or somebody was, for a long time China was under the control of European countries, and the United States had control of small parts of it. And when that was the case in the 1800s and early 1900s, there was a sign in one of the parks in Shanghai that said, "Dogs and Chinese not admitted." Now there's some revisionist historians now are claiming that that's all baloney, it wasn't true, because nobody's been able to produce a photo of that sign. But that sign, believe it or not, that whole sign business about no Chinese and no dogs allowed in that park, it became a major symbolic thing in China. It's so big that to this day it's very, very offensive to call a Chinese person a dog, and it's been written by, I have here the abstract of a scholarly article about that whole issue. So in fact, let me just read a little bit here. The potency of dog as an insulting and dehumanizing epithet in China undoubtedly exacerbated the insult and also made the story of the sign's outrageous wording seem all the more plausible. After all, Han Chinese had for centuries used the dog radical in characters referring to members of ethnic minorities living in Chinese frontier regions, and running dog has been a potent political epithet since the 1920s. So again, I don't think in that particular case that the shrine was trying to do anything against the Buddhists, but again, I can understand, and I think that's part of the problem, is that here is this cultural gap, this language barrier between the Chinese and us, English speaking.
Yeah, there's a big language barrier, and that's the primary problem that they're having. It's communication. Even though they're very well educated, intelligent people, they only have a handful of people that can speak English also. So translating the language from their holy master back and forth, sometimes I think some things get lost in translation. And let me just want to describe their living condition. It's like a monastery or a nunnery. The holy master Zhigguan Shangxi is the head. Everything goes through him. They work together as a unit. He makes all their decisions. While they are independent, independent personalities, if a decision has to be made for the group, it has to go through him first.
Okay, Jerry, we're going to take a little break, and when we come back, we'll be talking a little bit more for a few more minutes with Jerry. This is Dan Weaver, Valley Vox, and we're talking to our guest, Jerry Scrocky, about the Buddhists in Amsterdam and in Montgomery County.
Bank, proudly serving Fulton and Montgomery County since 2005, with locations on Route 30.